and it's the perfect time to talk about the weather. It's always a good time to talk about the weather, and we do more than enough of that, especially here in America. I'm sure that when you're listening to this, you've probably talked to somebody about the weather today, and we're going to do a whole lot more of that. We're talking about hot weather horse care, though. So hopefully you will glean some information that can add to all of this weather talk that we do. And we have the perfect person to walk us through how to best care for our horses in the hot weather. Jen Carter is here with us, and she's joining from Ocala, Florida. Jen, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. I am joining from Denver, and it's about 80 here, and I feel like I'm going to melt. What have the temperatures been in Florida lately?
We did get briefly lucky, I will say, not this past weekend, but like a week ago. We had Ocala horse trials at the horse park, and it's usually so hot. And we got lucky, and it rained one morning, so it kept it quite nice all day. And the next day was breezy. So for June, can't really complain. However, since then, we've gotten hot. I think here at our farm, we got one day of rain last week. And then it's just been really hot, like Saturday and Sunday, I think with mid 90s with 105 heat index. So it was pretty miserable. Today we had storms all around us and nothing that hit us. So it's really hot out there. I just actually came in from mowing, so I can attest it's really hot.
Yes. Well, I'm glad that you're here, sitting in the AC to join
Yes.
us for the conversation today. But you really know so much about caring for horses, both when they're in the barn and, unmounted, and also when they're being ridden and even when they're being competed when you're dealing with the elements and the element of heat. So I'm excited to talk more about all of the intricacies of how to consider your horse's care during this. But I was listening back on some episodes before we get started. I was listening back on some episodes today and realizing that early in Ask an Expert, so 4 years ago, I was much better about doing what are we doing here? Who are we here? And now I kind of just, jump right in because we've been doing it for so long. But for anybody who's new to Ride IQ, what are we doing here? We're doing our weekly question and answer with an expert on a specific topic. Hopefully, the title gave it away. The intro gave it away. But you're always welcome to join us on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern. If you want to be part of the conversation and add your questions as we're having the conversation, you're welcome to do that. Otherwise, we put these out to the app. And I'm so happy that Jen is our guest this week because Jen has been a recurring guest on the show. I should have looked how many you've done, but you've done a lot of these. But we often do the Jen and Kyle duo, which is really fun. But I was so excited just to have an hour with Jen today, so that we can just dive in together. But Jen is a 5-star event rider. She's coached riders at every level of the sport and to the top level of the sport. And she also has an incredible eye for talent, especially on the equine side. She has picked out some really incredible horses that have gone to the top of the sport, and that's such a gift. I don't know if that's innate or learned, but it seems like it's a little bit of both because it's not something a lot of people have a talent for. So, and Jen is formerly Kinsey and my coach. So we used to work with Jen and Kyle in Florida and got to experience some of this heat firsthand. But just a little introduction for anybody who hasn't been here for a long time.
Well, and
With
I'll
that, Jen.
apologize in advance since Kyle's not with me. I'm not quite as long-winded as he can be, so hopefully, I can answer your questions as well as he would be able to. So
Of
I'll give it a
course
shot.
you can. Of course you can. But we don't have someone to poke fun at with all the long
I know.
answers, but we'll find something else to do. Let's start with defining hot weather when it comes to horse care. So, I mean, I know there are people listening from all parts of the country and even the world. And to me, I start feeling like it's a really hot day when we pass 70 degrees Fahrenheit. And I know that's probably different for you. So, what temperature warrants specific care with regard to hot weather?
Well, okay, first of all, this is a generalization because individually every horse tolerates heat a little differently, just like people. Some people just seem fine in it, some struggle more with it. I find the older I get, the less heat tolerant I am, and I do find kind of similar with our horses. But I would say for the horses that we have that are used to being in Florida, they're pretty good, through say like upper 80s, 90ish. You start to get kind of mid 90s with the humidity we have. And then we do tend to alter our program a little bit just to accommodate them because, they're strictly out there doing it because we're asking them to do. I don't think they would necessarily on their own just go and do a half an hour of running around in the heat. So, we keep it fairly consistent. For us, we're fortunate. We have a shaded ring. So in the mornings here, we get to ride in the shade. Now we can't jump in the shade mostly because our rings aren't big enough for the jumps, but we do have some shaded areas where we can jump. But the mornings can be quite lovely actually here, as long as it's not too humid. But we are getting to that point in the year now where the humidity is starting to go up. And that's where you really have to pay attention. When the humidity levels, I think it's like 70% humidity and above, that is miserable. The sweat doesn't evaporate as well. They don't cool off as quickly because of that. It's just you're finding everything's a little bit of an extra effort on you yourself and the horse in that type of humidity when the temperatures are high. You do acclimate, the horses acclimate, but it's still, I'd say that's kind of where we start to really go, okay, we got to kind of alter a little bit what we're doing with them.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I mean, this kind of reminds me of when I was much younger. I brought a horse out to Colorado, to the Colorado Horse Park, and I guess he was accustomed to heat, but it was an especially hot weekend when we were competing there. So if in a situation like that, let's say that he was coming from Minnesota, so he's not quite as accustomed to the heat. In a situation where you're traveling with a horse to somewhere where they aren't acclimated to the heat, would you be cautious about running a horse that doesn't have experience in that climate?
Well, I would let the horse tell me. Like if we shipped from a cold climate to somewhere hot to compete, you have to kind of read your horse. If some of them are just going to be like, okay, we're fine, get on with it. Others aren't going to acclimate as well, and you have to kind of let them tell you. There's obviously a lot of things you can do. So one thing that we do a lot of down here, and so if we ship somewhere hot and a horse wasn't used to it, I would kind of follow this protocol. But you want to give them breaks and cool them out while you're riding them. So ideally find as much shade as you can to ride in, but sometimes that's not available. Keep ice bucket water handy and, every 10, 15 minutes stop, cool them out pretty well. Monitor their temperature is a big thing because that's really how you're going to know how they're dealing with it. I would say we typically, if they're at like 102, maybe just a little above and under, it's usually fairly normal for it down here this time of year when you're working them. Anything kind of starting to get 103 and up, then you kind of back down, you cool them out as much as you can. Just keep putting water. Like if you were doing a 10-minute cool out, basically you'd be putting as much ice water as you could, or cold water, I should say, on them. Until they get their temperature back down, because that's really the best way to tell how they're dealing with it. So if you were going somewhere hot from a cold climate, I would probably try and have that handy. I know we went out to Montana to Rebecca Farms back in 2023 with Gus, and he was here getting ready for it. So he was used to the heat and the humidity. But you get out there, and I mean, now it is not as humid by any stretch, but it was in the upper 90s, and that is still really hot. So we just did a lot of trying to ride him in the cool. Now he did compete in the heat of the day for the 4 star. But we just, they were great there. They had tents with the misting fans at the cool out, and you just stand them in front of that as much as you can. And you just put as much cold water as you can until you get them kind of back down to normal. If you get out on course and your horse isn't dealing with it, pull up. I mean, there's always going to be another day, and you don't want to torture them. So that's what I would do. If you're shipping there, try and drive in the cooler part of the day. If you can handle driving overnight, that would be ideal, because that is one thing I think people overlook is the shipping can be really hot on them. Yes, they get the breeze flowing through, but it's still hot. They don't have air conditioning. And if you're, on a paved interstate, like you got the sun baking right on you. So as much as you can ship in the cooler weather is ideal, at least till you get somewhere where it's, not as torturously hot.
We had a lot of questions about hauling um, around this topic. So let's jump into that. Hauling through the night or hauling when it's cooler makes a lot of sense. Are there other efforts that make a big difference for horses if you're hauling in the summertime and you're not able to make your entire trip overnight or even any of your trip overnight?
Yeah, sure. Yes, it's not ideal, but I don't drive well at night anymore, so I certainly wouldn't want to haul all night. What we've done in the past is bags of ice in your shavings in the trailer that can really help bring the temperature down. So you just get as many bags as you can that aren't going to get in the way, and you just lay them right there in the shavings in the trailer. And the shavings actually will help keep them from melting as quickly, and that does bring the temperature down quite a bit. If you can get fans in your trailer, great, but not everybody has that option. And a big thing I know we touched on trailering, a few episodes ago, but the windows have to be open. The doors have to be open as much as you can. Too often we see people down here shipping with the doors all closed. It is so hot in there. Like, get those, yes, not every trailer has it, but if your doors can open and you can travel with them open, do it. It is the best thing for the horse, not only for the ventilation, but the temperature. It's just going to keep more air flowing through and hopefully keep it marginally better. You could stop more often, give them more water breaks, stuff like that, because if you stop, think about if you're at a truck stop or somewhere, you might be able to park under some sort of shade for them and let them have some water and break that way. Those would be, probably mostly what I could think of for that.
That's quite a pro tip with the ice bags and the shavings that I haven't heard of or seen done. Do you like they just crunch all over the ice when they walk in
Well,
and
we don't put them right under the horses if you can
got it.
avoid it. So like if we have empty stalls in the trailer, we'll just throw ice bags and put shavings over them, and so it just kind of keeps a little bit of a
Got
cooler
it.
temperature. And they do make things now, and I don't know how effective they would be, but we've gotten a little portable air conditioner for our tack room in our barn before, and it just charges, like on a normal cord you charge your phone on. I don't know if that might help, but it'd be worth a shot, and they're not very expensive. If you could get something like that, that they don't last that long, but it might be helpful. And if you could charge it for a bit and put it back in there, depending on how long your trip is, but that would be interesting to try something like that too.
Yeah. Do you guys recommend having a thermometer in the trailer so that you have a
Yes.
gauge of so if you have a thermometer in the trailer, what are you looking for it to be at or below?
Well, if they're just standing in the trailer and, just not working, I personally wouldn't want anything over 101 really, because, they shouldn't. If it's over 101 and they're just standing in a trailer, then it says either they're getting overheated or something else is going on with them, because just standing in there, it really shouldn't get much above that.
So you're talking about horse temp. I'm curious if there's a temp in like
Oh,
actually
for the air,
in the
right.
trailer.
The
Is
ambient
that
air. Some people do have those where they can test the air temperature. We've never done it. So I mean, gosh, again, thinking of what, they're big. They have a big muscle mass. They have hair, even though you can clip them. Um, they're going to not, like, if you think about if you're standing in a trailer and it gets to 95 degrees in there, that's going to be really hot on a horse, because it would be uncomfortable on me. And I would think that I probably am better equipped to deal with that than they are. But I honestly don't know the answer to that. That would be worth asking probably a veterinarian or somebody.
yeah. Um, that's super helpful, and I think is there another thing that I wondered when we were showing is, at the end of a long day of showing, everyone's ready to get out of there, but the trailer's been in the sun baking all day, and it's pretty hot to get to put a horse in there and definitely hot to have a horse standing in there. Is there anything that you guys do to make sure that that's a safe space to be putting your horses either to stand or when you're ready to go because it's just a metal box that's been sitting in the heat?
Well, we're fortunate our trailer's pretty well insulated, so it actually like yeah, I'm not going to say you get in there and you're like, yay, this is great, but it actually is not so bad in ours. But I would do the ice bags. If, put them in there maybe an hour before you're getting ready to put your horses on, you could put them all over and it will bring the temperature down. So that when you put the horses on, hopefully it's not quite as bad. If you
That's
have any
awesome.
way to set a fan up in there, I don't know. Obviously, it depends on the power source and all that, but if you could set a fan up in there to just keep the air moving a little bit before you needed to put anybody in there.
Yeah. I think it's those thoughtful efforts that make a big difference. And um, sometimes sometimes it just becomes the norm maybe not to do those things, but it is warranted when, your horse has to be sitting in there and trying to survive. So I think that those are really nice efforts to make, um, when you have to haul in the heat. Let's talk
Yeah.
about, you mentioned that some horses just do better in the heat than others, just like humans. Are there any factors that should be considered that would affect a horse's ability beyond just like that's how they are? Like, does age affect it? Does fitness affect it significantly? I would assume that breed is a big factor, but tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I think you touched on all of that probably plays in. Now, with the age thing, this is just my personal experience, and I'm sure there's somebody, who could say, yes, it's been proven. But certainly, as you think about a lot of horses as they get older, suffer from Cushing's and then their hair gets longer, right? So that's one thing. And I found on our older ones that they don't necessarily sweat quite as well as the younger ones. So this is just my feeling is that, yes, as they age, they're less heat tolerant. And yeah, breed for sure. I'm going to guess, big draft horse isn't going to love being in Florida working. We don't have any of those, but you definitely see some of our warm bloods are not quite as good. I will say the thoroughbreds are probably a little better at handling it. They seem to deal a little better with it, but it also might be their mentality. Thoroughbreds tend to just have that I'm going to work, I'm going to work, I'm going to work. That's their temperament. And sometimes the warm bloods are like, that's a lot of work and I don't want to do it. So again, it is horse specific. I'm being very general.
Yeah.
Um, and the fitter they are, yeah, they should handle it better. A big problem we have here in the South, in Florida, and I'm sure probably Georgia, Alabama, all of that is, we have a lot of cases of anhydrosis. Those of you who don't know what that is, it means the horses stop sweating in the heat. And that is a terrible, terrible thing. They just can't cool themselves. They pant, they're trying to cool themselves with their air intake. But when you can't sweat and you overheat, and I mean, you can cook a horse by doing it without being cautious of what's happening to them. We had one years ago, a client bred, and he came down here from Alabama, and he just never really could sweat. Now he was a really big horse too, and I don't know if that had any play on it, but it ended up the people who bought him built him an air conditioned stall, which was amazing for him. But he still never really got where he would just sweat normally. But basically, anhydrosis is caused when the sweat glands get overused and they just shut down because they're in too much use. We find in the summers here when the temperature at night stays over 70 consistently is when you usually start to notice it. So we found with those horses, a lot of times just going north for a week or two where it's cooler can regenerate their sweat issues. I'm not saying that always works, but we found that helps. We've had some horses come over from Europe, and a lot of times that first summer they don't really sweat very well. And so then you're starting to go, oh no, we bought something that doesn't sweat. And then the next year, once they've acclimated, they're actually quite a bit more normal. Again, it doesn't always happen that way. Um, so I think it's just, again, it's so hard to say because it's so individual. We've had horses we've bred here that have grown up in Florida and they're fine, they're fine, they're fine, and then one summer they quit sweating. Um, so there's really for us no way to really predict. We've had young horses do it, we've had old horses do it, all breeds do it. There's a lot of supplements you can do. We've tried a lot of them. again, people often ask us, but you have to be aware that not everything works on every horse. So we've had luck with some supplements on one horse and then it won't work on the next one. Um, we've had people recommend feeding your horse Guinness beer to get him to sweat. And again, we had it work on one and not another. Acupuncture, same thing. The latest thing last year was vodka. People were giving their horses vodka. Now, I will say that did seem to work actually fairly well. Um, so I tend to be a little more conservative though and want to stick with when we have a supplement that works rather than feeding your horse vodka
Vodka.
because God knows long. I know. I'm just like, I don't know long
It's
term
happy
what
hour.
difference. Exactly. Um, so yeah, there's a lot of different things you can try. There are so many supplements, and there are a lot of new things coming out on the market all the time because honestly, this is becoming more prevalent. You can talk to anybody down here, and they will say the same thing. More and more horses seem to be suffering from anhidrosis as the years go on because we're just getting hotter. The summers
Wow.
last longer. It isn't even just the heat, but our summers typically now, like our real hot weather starts at the beginning of June. And where we used to feel like September, it got better, it is going well into mid October now before it really gets cool.
And these
So,
horses that are dealing with anhidrosis, is it I know that everyone is different, but do most of them snap back into sweating, like, within the season? Or, like, what would you expect when you have a horse starting to show that this is happening? Would you expect that it can resolve or is likely to resolve soon, or is it a longer
well,
road for most of them?
I think that's usually what ends up happening. We're always hopeful that it'll be a brief moment in time, but it's happened so much that now it's kind of like, oh no, we got to figure something out with this one.
Yeah.
So a lot of times when and there's signs, there are a lot of signs that they're going to quit sweating. Like their coats change a little bit. A lot of times you'll find their hair stands up on end, even though they have a summer coat. Um, they just start to, when they're working, they sweat, but it's not like a profuse sweat. So there are some symptoms that show, and again, I want to be clear, this doesn't happen on every horse. A lot of times they just quit. But we've gotten to the point we can see a little bit now sometimes where you're like, that one's going to quit. But then on the offside, I remember we had a horse a few years ago that someone's like, oh, this one's going to be a non-sweater. He never quit. So
Wow.
take that with a grain of salt. But yeah, we always hope that it's going to be a quick kind of get through and expect that it's probably not,
Yeah.
if that makes
On
sense.
that in itself is great to know that there's so much variety in how it presents, if and when it shows up, how it's treated in any given horse. Like knowing if and when it shows up in your horse, just kind of like what's next, and what's next is trial and error basically. Um, I think is important. Let's talk about let's kind of form our conversation with we'll talk unmounted next, and then we'll get more into caring for horses when being ridden. But just in general, when you think about how you're caring for horses in their day-to-day lives, not under saddle, during the really hot part of the year, what efforts make the biggest difference for a horse's well-being and comfort?
Well, I would say, primarily if your horse lives out, make sure they have shade. We're lucky our horses get to come in stalls where they have fans and everything, but a lot of people just keep their horses out and that's fine, but make sure they always have access to shade. And then the biggest thing is water, clean, fresh water. It is amazing how many people over the years we've gone through a summer with, and they don't seem to realize that that is such an important thing to a horse. And we'll find waters that are dry. It's been a while, but and I mean, we're not the only place. You can talk to everybody has the same issue, but like think about if you were out exercising in the heat. I mean, we do it a lot down here, and you get to that point where all you can think about is drinking water. Think about how your poor horse feels if they don't have access to it. So water water would be the number one thing. Make sure they have an adequate supply of clean water too. Not, you don't want the water that's got algae in it, because I mean, again, like they'll drink it, but wouldn't it be nicer for them not to? And shade would be the big thing. And if they're in a stall, then fans. I'd say almost every barn has access to power. Put a fan in their stall, put two if you have that option. We have fans on all our stalls, and it does make a big difference. Some barns they run water on their roofs, like on the top, to keep the temperature down. And again, we haven't done that, and I don't know how hard that is, but if you have a way to do that, that's a good way to keep the barn cooler as well when it's really hot. Um, yeah, that's the big thing, water and shade.
I
As
love
far as their environment, for taking care of them, if like we clip ours when they get fuzzy in the summer, and it used to be that I was never thought that needed to happen, and now we have a few that get clipped all summer.
Are you doing full body clips, or what kind of clipping are you doing?
Yeah. Yeah, they get everything but their legs clipped, and we only leave the legs because there's so much fungus in the soil down here. The hair does help protect against that. So we just leave their legs clipped, but the rest of them get clipped. Face, everything.
And once you've clipped them, is there any like extra, I don't know, precautions is the right word that you're taking, but like are they in a fly sheet more often, or are they, I guess you said the skin issues you can kind of prevent by leaving the hair on their legs, but do you adjust anything after they've been clipped?
I would say we don't do fly sheets as much as we used to because again, they just get so hot. But if you have one that gets really bothered by hives or whatever, if they're out in the rain or the wet grass, then we might put it on just temporarily to get rid of the hives. But in general, we don't use fly sheets as much anymore. And again, that's just us. Like I see a lot of horses wearing fly sheets, fly masks, fly boots, everything out there, and that's fine. And we just don't do it because they're pretty warm. If it's been raining and they're out, you're probably going to have some skin funk, and that is not uncommon here in the summers. We get a lot of storms. We seem to get a lot overnight that we didn't used to get when they're out. You can towel them all off as much as you can when they come in. That's helpful, but not always logistically possible, especially if you have a lot of horses. But I would say in the summer down here for their skin, having a lot of towels around is a really, really great idea because, as soon as you bathe them, you want to dry them off as much as possible and just basically keep them dry as much as possible. But again, you're balancing like, are they going to go out at night in the rain and risk getting skin funk, or are they going to stay in a stall and not be able to go out and then they're miserable? So we always choose turn them out. Like I know sometimes it sucks, but I would rather them have a little skin funk than not be up because I want their coats to look amazing.
Yeah. Talk to us about electrolytes. I know you said having clean water all the time is important. Do you guys recommend electrolytes? And is there anything to be cautious of if you're offering electrolytes?
Yes, the one thing about electrolytes is that yes, definitely do electrolytes, do salt, whatever. Free choice salt's the best way to do it because they get what they need, but we do electrolytes in their feed. And the big thing, stay away from the ones that have a lot of sucrose in them because that's just sugars. And they make them taste better. So yeah, the horses like them better, but they're not as good for them. So we stay away from the ones that have a lot of sucrose in them. There's a bunch of good ones out there. We typically use the Finish Line Apple a Day or the Summer Games are the two big ones that we use.
And are those supplements something that people should just integrate into their horse's care during the hot months, or
Yeah.
is it something that just during the hot months?
That's what I mean. Some people do them year round, and I don't know that that's a bad thing because I do believe from talking to nutritionalists, they just urinate out whatever they don't use. So I don't think you're going to harm them by feeding them electrolytes year round. We just don't do it because,
You don't
saving
need them to
costs
pee it
where
out.
you need to. Yeah, exactly. So we just do it when it's hot.
Okay. Is there any concern just thinking about how a lot of boarding barns work? They typically have the shelter outside so that there's shade for horses to go in if needed. But is there a concern about like if your horse is at the bottom of the pecking order that they don't actually have access to that shade? And in that case, should you be looking to something like private turnout? Um, is that a thing that people worry about?
Well, I mean, I guess that's hard for me to answer because we don't really board here. And then we also don't do big groups of turnout. The most we ever do are two. And even then, like, I think right now we just have two mares that are out together. Um, and I will say they have shelter. They also have a big tree. So they have a couple different places where they can get shade. So I don't worry too much because I'm like, if one of them gets bossy with the shelter, the other one can go under the tree. So but if it were me and I were boarding my horse somewhere and it didn't have access to shade, I would request private turnout if possible, a different turnout maybe, like if there were hours that it could go out differently, or I might look for a new place. I mean, I do really feel like in the South, now again, you might live somewhere north and this isn't a problem, but down here, and probably pretty much anywhere on the west coast to here, you want your horse to have access to shade. It is funny I say that though, and a lot of times we'll drive around here and there are horses that in the middle in the heat of the day just stand out in the middle of the field even though they do have shade. So I'm
Yeah,
going to say I personally want the option, but a lot of times horses don't use it.
true. Yeah, I know. I see that too, and it makes me feel bad for them, but it is like I don't it's not me laying there. They're apparently enjoying the sunbathing.
Yeah, I guess.
Okay, so we talked about what efforts can make a big difference in a positive way for these horses that are in the heat. Are there any efforts that come to mind that people make that really are overrated, that aren't helpful, that you can think of in terms of unmounted care?
um I don't think I don't have experience with this, so I hesitate to criticize it because I don't really know. But I see a lot of people talk about cooling blankets, and I don't know enough. I guess if they had ice packs on them, that would probably be fine. But no, I can't really think of anything I've heard that people do that's over the top. I think in general, people have the best intentions. So,
Yeah.
you know what? If you go overboard trying something and if it's not helpful, whatever, it's your effort. I don't think I've heard of anything harmful as
Yes.
far as
Okay.
just care of a horse in the heat, other than not having water for it. That, yes, I'm a big critic of that.
Yeah, we will criticize that. All
Exactly.
right, let's chat about riding in the heat. What Let's do the same thing we did for unmounted. What are the efforts that make the biggest difference for a horse? Let's say it's just a flat work schooling day, and for whatever reason, you aren't riding like super early or super late, so you're dealing with the heat. What are some things that you should be doing to, one, make sure that your horse is faring all right in the weather, and two, proactively keep them comfortable and safe?
I think a big thing we do is a lot of walk breaks. Like, I know you're not necessarily getting out of it, but you think about a lot of times when the weather's cool, we just get on and start doing our thing and not really think too much about it and keep working until everything feels great. But so we do a lot more walking within our work when it's hot in the summer. I know there's a ton of great lessons on Red IQ that are just walking. You can do a lot at the walk. Obviously, fitness and cardio, you're not going to get anything out of that doing that. But, like in the summer, I don't know how much fitness, unless you live up north, and then it's different anyways, because your horses probably aren't struggling in the heat. But I feel like you can do a lot at the walk. But we will work them. I'm not saying that. It's just, you do 10 minutes and then you give them a walk break. And if you can ride in shade, that is ideal. And again, I know not everybody has that option. And like you said, we tend to try and ride in the morning. A lot of people around here ride at night because it can be quite lovely. But if you don't have those options and you can only ride in the heat of the day, I would have water to cool them down with. Take the time, if they're getting really hot, just take the time to throw some water on them. Do that when they need it. It's going to make a big difference on them. Yeah, that's what I would say. Walk breaks, have some water to cool them down.
Will you talk me through what this watering off looks like? Because I have never done it. Would you generally, like, ideally have somebody on the ground with you to sponge them, scrape them, just and then move on during your ride?
Yes, if you can, that would be ideal. I know a lot of people ride by themselves and they don't have that option. So then you just try and hopefully you have a spigot or something near where you ride so you can just park a bucket there and then go get off and sponge your horse down or hose them if you have a hose. There's a lot of different thoughts now on the scraping and the heat. So it used to always be put water on, you scrape it right off. You put water on, you scrape it right off. They did do a study a few years ago, I believe in Japan, with the racehorses that found that actually the most effective cooling is just to keep putting water on them and not scraping. Um, that was the most efficient way to cool a horse. I do know there are still a lot of people that's a hard thing to embrace because we tend to stick by our old habits and not look forward to change. But so when we're at a 3 day now, we tend to just keep putting water on and putting water on and putting water on and try and stand them in front of a fan rather than doing a lot of scraping. So I would say just have a bucket, sponge, hose, whatever you can use to just get water on them. And, obviously you're going to have your tack on them. So you can't really put water on the back. A big place you can dissipate a lot of heat is their chest and their neck, and then between their hind legs. Those are all really good focal points if you're trying to really do something, not a big broad cool out, but those would be the points that you really want to try and get cold water on.
Okay. And you mentioned fitness. Once we reach the heat of the summer or spring, in our case, like in the case of right now, it's already hot in a lot of parts of the country. Um, are you still doing fitness work? Are there still gallop days? I mean, obviously competitions are happening. So what does fitness look like in the summer versus other parts of the year when you're preparing for an event?
So our horses all just did Ocala last weekend. And the idea for us, and this is just us, is that now they're on a little bit of a quieter schedule for the next little bit while it's hot. So we're not galloping. We're not doing anything like that with them. We do have our trot pond here, and they will, like, honestly, on Saturday, it was so humid that morning that we just early got them done in the trot pond. Now they didn't do as long as they normally would like when they're in the middle of their competition season. But just trotting around in the water made it, not miserable at all for them because they're constantly getting water on them while they're doing it. So that would be their fitness right now. If we were competing in the summer and needed to gallop, I mean, they'd be galloping, but we would alter our time. It would be first thing in the morning when it's as cool as it can be. The mornings aren't terrible here. They're in the 70s. So you think about that, like where you are, that's a summer day, right? So um, you just would have to really make it an effort. And if you have a job that is hard to work with, you're going to have to sacrifice somewhere for their sake. If they have to gallop, you really don't want to be asking them to gallop in 95-degree weather. I mean, it's just so many issues could arise. It's really not fair to them. So I would say if we were galloping this summer, it would be early in the morning
Nice.
or at
Okay.
night. Some people like to ride at night. We don't, but you know.
Yeah, cools off then too. Um, all right. Let's talk about when it's a good day to ride and when it's a bad day to ride. I'll give you a scenario and you tell me if it's a good day to ride. So, if somebody is not able to get out to the barn, let's say before work or after work, so their option is midday, and this is just a flat work schooling day for them, but they would have to endure the elements like, they're not in the shade. It's 90 plus degrees. What would you suggest, like, let's just skip it, or is this a good day to do an all walking day? I think that a lot of people have that conundrum in their head, like they feel like they're doing the wrong thing if they don't ride their horse or exercise their horse or make progress on whatever horse training that they're doing at the moment. But then there's this other side of like, are the risks outweighing the benefits or the cons outweighing the pros? How would you suggest that people can kind of go through that thought process in their mind?
Well, for me, I always think, okay, first of all, why are you riding horses? The majority of the people are doing it for their enjoyment. Um, so if you are not anywhere super close to a horse show that you need to really be practicing for, just walk, do whatever makes you happy. I mean, that's the thing. You should be enjoying it. Your horse is only doing whatever you're asking of them. They're not, again, they're not going out there being like, oh, I have to do this. So walk or don't ride or whatever makes you happy, but don't feel guilty if that's what you choose. And that's, I think, a hard thing because, like you just said, as it's a conundrum for riders that are sitting there like, oh, I must work, I must work, I must work. Why? I mean, you have to question why, because you're supposed to be enjoying it. So if there's a day where you just aren't feeling it, it really is hot and miserable and you don't want to do it, do you think they want to do it? Probably not. So, I mean, there are a lot of days we'll just get on and be like, you know what, it's so hot, they're going to hack today. So we'll just go on a nice walk with them. And don't feel guilty about it. I mean, that's the reality is if you don't have a show coming up imminently, don't feel guilty about it. They're going to be fine unless you start doing that every single day. And then, of course, they're going to lose some fitness. But in general, they're not going to lose fitness just by going on a walk here and there or, skipping it altogether. Just hang out in the barn with them. I mean, sometimes you can get as much enjoyment out of that and they're probably happier.
I love that tip. And I love to hear advice like that that just helps kind of relieve the pressure and make it not so much of a thing, you know? Um, you all have permission to take the day off if you want to for whatever reason, including heat.
Yeah,
Let's
and don't feel guilty. I think there's such a stigma and everybody's so driven and then you feel guilty but don't. I mean, the whole point of this is to be enjoying it. Yes, some people this is our job or whatever, so you have a little more to answer to, but even that, you still have to make it cuz think about it, if you're hot and miserable and your horse is hot and miserable, how productive are you going to be? I mean, it
Mhm.
just some days you just go, you know what? This is going to be an enjoyable day rather than us banging our heads against a wall.
Yeah, no one's gonna feel bad about it. I
No.
love it. Okay, so on hot days, when you've worked your horse, how do you approach cool down differently?
Well, again, horse specific. It depends. If the horse is really overheated by the work, we try and get them back to the barn as quick as possible and just start hosing, take their temperature to know. Again, always important in the summer when they're working hard to kind of have an idea of where their temperature stays. Because that's the truest testament to when they're really getting overheated. Um, so if they're not struggling, then we just maybe walk them out a little bit longer. Now again, our arena's a little far away from our barn, so they actually do get quite a walk going back to the barn. But then they instantly go in and get a bath and then they go stand in front of their fan. So usually if it's a normal day, it's not too bad. If they're jumping or something where it's a little bit more strenuous on them and they're working a little harder, after they jump, they would walk a little bit before they go back to the barn. Whereas on a flat day, they pretty much will work and then just walk right back to the barn. Gallop days are different because they're walking anyways. It's built into our gallop schedule. If they're doing our trot pond, then again, they've got a bit of a walk back to the barn. Plus, I usually don't feel like they overheat in the trot pond. So, but I would
Okay.
just be conscious of it if they're overheating, maybe get them back to the barn as quick as you can, not other than a walk, I mean, but like walk them
Yeah.
back to the barn as quick as you can and just start getting water on them. Maybe if you have a big fan you can stand them in front of while you're doing that, or if you have a fan for your aisleway, or any getting the air moving is really going to help cool them down, but water is the most important thing, like getting water on them.
Right. Okay, got it. And you're talking about managing their temperature, and I know you said over 102 is when tell me if I'm wrong, but is when they need like a walk break during their work. What are the other temperature thresholds that you're looking for? So,
Well,
yeah, just talk me
everyone
through
might
that.
have kind of a different opinion on this. This is just kind of where we're at. Like, so I feel like down here in the summer on a normal day, working on the flat, and again, horse specific, because a bigger, heavier horse might have a higher temperature because they're working a little harder just with all the bulk. Like 102 would be, I guess what I would expect, like 102 or below. If it's one a little like 102.5 and above is when I start to go, okay, maybe it's a little bit where they need to get cooled off quicker. Now we don't take their temperature while we're actually riding them. It's usually when they get back to the barn. But if you do have one that doesn't sweat and you want to keep riding them, it is important to have a thermometer so you can, because you do not want to push them past a point of no return. Um, so, if they're not sweating and they're panting, I would go back to the barn and take their temperature. That's what we pretty much do right off the bat. Sometimes on one, I will say, and I forgot to mention this earlier, but a lot of times I'll have one that's not really sweating. And so I stop and start walking it. And sometimes after a walk break, it starts sweating fine. I've had that happen more than once. And I was teaching someone a few weeks ago on a horse that was a normal sweater. And on that particular day, he did not sweat, not very well at all. So I was like, okay, let's put him on a supplement. And the supplements don't work this quick, but the next day she came back for another lesson. He was completely fine. So who knows what was going on with him the one day, but sometimes you can have stuff like that. So it's really important you're aware every day. First of all, what does your horse sweat like normally? Like in a winter time, is it a heavy sweater or not? Because a lot of times horses sweat a lot and then they don't. A lot of times they stay consistent, but it's important to know what your horse is like. We have a few here that don't sweat a lot, but it isn't necessarily that they're not sweating. That's them. They just aren't naturally really overly sweaty horses like people. Some people sweat a lot, some don't. So just it's important to know what your horse's normal is, if that makes sense. And that's
Totally,
also a good
yes.
thing. Temperature wise, some horses naturally just have a little bit of a higher temperature every day than another horse. Now, it doesn't mean they're sick or anything, they just run a little hotter. So it is good to have that information. And, I know it's hard if you get a new horse, you have to learn that. But like if you have a horse you've had for a while, it's just good to pay attention to that kind of stuff.
That makes a lot of sense. Like, make it part of your routine so you understand your horse's baseline, so that if they're way outside of that baseline, that starts throwing a red flag for you versus like, I don't know if this is this normal? Like in the moment, is this normal? Knowing whether it's
Yeah.
normal will be really helpful. Um, are there any telltale signs of overheating? I'm hearing that like if we're way outside of the horse's normal, that's a telltale sign to be concerned. But is there anything like with your trained eye that would be like that is a horse that should probably go get its temp taken or be done?
um, I usually find if they start panting really hard and they're sweating and everything, that's not. Now, some horses do pant naturally, but that would be a big indicator for me. And then I'd take their heart rate as well. All of that, like, so heart rate is something really important that I think a lot of people overlook for different things. But a lot of times people will be like, "Oh, I think it's colicky," but it doesn't have a temperature. And my thing is like, what is its heart rate? Heart rate is an indicator of stress. If the heart rate goes up, it's stress causing it, usually, whether it's pain or if they're overheating. Respiration and temperature are so important to know. And so, again, it's good to have a baseline where your horse normally is. Um, I would recommend finding your horse resting on a normal day, take its heart rate, take its respiration rate, just to have an idea, because some horses don't breathe as much as other horses on a minute basis. Same with the heart rate. So it's good to have a note of what is normal for your horse. But that's why when you're at a big 3 day and at the end, the vets monitor the heart and the respiration as well as the temperature. But we've already covered that. The heart rate and the respiration is also a really good indicator of what's going on with your horse. So you should be able to look at a horse and know it's breathing excessively fast and hard, like its nostrils are inflating as full as they can on a very frequent repetition. That's usually not a great indicator unless they've just galloped a 5 star in hot weather. But even at the end of a 5 star, a lot of times you aren't going to see that. So that would be an indicator for me if I start seeing that on a horse, that I'm usually like, oh, I don't know that they're dealing as well with this as they should.
Got it. Okay,
If
that
that
makes a lot of sense. As far as equipment goes, do you change anything when it's hot out? Do saddle pads change? Do boots change? Or are those, too insignificant to really be making a difference for your horses?
No, not at all. I think boots, we do not use boots on their legs when we flat anymore, unless they really have an issue and need them. But we haven't had that in a while, because the boots have shown to overheat the legs quite a bit. So we really have stopped using boots as much as we can. We do use front boots when we jump just to protect their legs. But honestly, sometimes now we won't even do that because studies are showing how much damage and heat a boot can cause. However, we're not at the point yet where we're going to go compete without them. So sometimes it is nice to just make sure they're used to them. Saddle pads, yeah, we will change when we can. We use more of a fitted type saddle pad in the heat. Obviously, for dressage, it's hard because they don't really make those that much. But like for the jumping and stuff, especially if we have one that doesn't deal as well, they'll get a fitted saddle pad. But those are kind of really the only changes in tack and everything that we make.
When you say fitted, do you mean like the shape of the saddle, or is it different?
Yes. No,
Okay,
exactly. It just is the complete shape of the saddle. So less stuff on their back, the minimal that you can have on their back.
totally. Okay. Um, are there any changes that you make to a horse's feeding schedule when when it's hot or if they're not sweating?
Not with the non-sweating. You know, we've never really delved into a different diet, but we have a lot of really good feeds, and we have, Purina nutritionalists we can talk to, and I don't know that we really ever change their diet, but feeding schedule wise, yes, we do change ours in the summer. We start later in the afternoon. And then in the afternoons, like from 12 to 4, our horses just are in their stall with, standing in front of their fans. Hopefully they will go out later because it is just so hot. So we try and get them out a little bit later. We keep the morning routine the same though, year round.
So you said you feed their second meal later.
Well, for us, it's their third meal because ours eat
Their
three
third
times
meal.
a day. But
Okay.
yeah, a lot of people only do twice a day, and that's fine. But and again, you might be in a situation you can't do that. That's just what we do. You got to make it work for you. So ideally, if your horses go out at night and you can get them out later when it's super hot, that's nicer. But don't stress if you can't. As long as they have shade and water, they'll be okay with that.
Okay. And when in what situation should somebody call a vet because their horse is not handling the heat well?
Cool. Um, Again, I guess it just depends. Like we typically handle our stuff ourselves,
Right.
but we
You
do
guys
have
know a
on
little bit
time.
better.
Yeah. So if you're, more, I don't know how to term this. If you're more of an amateur horse owner and you keep your horses at home and you know what, don't ever be scared to call your vet. Like if you're concerned at all that there's something and you'd rather pay that fee for them to come out and be like, you know what, I think it's okay, than to miss on something. So I feel like if their temperature is up a little higher and you can't get it to come down with the standard cooling, I would call your vet. So for me, that would be probably if it's staying above like 103 while you're trying to cool it off, I would be calling a vet. And I just think that, and again, it's hard because not everybody has the vet access we have here. So you might be out in some random area where you're not, but even if you could just get on a phone with a vet, that would be better than you just trying to second guess yourself, but do it yourself. Does that make sense?
Yes, totally. Absolutely. That was really clear. We haven't talked about post cross country care, and that's because I was assuming that post cross country care isn't actually that different than post hot weather riding care. Like you talked about keeping the cool water on them, putting them in front of the fans. Do you keep them walking? And are there other things that you're doing? I know ice boots are probably in the mix, hot weather or not, but are there other things to be considering after a super strenuous exercise like that?
Well, if you don't have access to them to be in front of a fan, then keep them moving because any air moving on them is going to be helpful. If yes, like hours after the cross country, they definitely will be walking just to make sure they don't have any muscle soreness or anything like that. Again, if we're at home, ours go out. So we know they're moving around. We do a lot of ice on their legs. And again, it depends on the horse as far as how much and what they did and all that. But, typically our horses get iced after cross country and then wrapped when they're in their stall. But like, they'll go out and move around so they don't get too stiff or whatever. But as far as cooling them, just keep water and air on them any way you can.
Okay, so it's not terribly different than any other ride. It's just going to take more to get them to their neutral state.
Exactly. And again, the thermometer is your friend. Like that's what's going to be your biggest indicator of that they're actually cooling down. And a lot of horses do cool down and then their temp will go up a little bit again. And it's just, as they kind of stop getting the water on them and they sit for a little bit, sometimes their temp can go back up. So it's always good if you're at an event and you've done your cool out and you put them back in their stall, make sure and keep an eye on their temp like 10 minutes later or 20 minutes later, even 5 minutes later, just so are we good or do we need to cool them down more? And I mean, a lot of times we cool them down and cool them down and cool them down. You just have to do whatever it takes for them.
That's really good to know. So good to know that I'm putting it on my basically my good to know list that I'm making right here as my takeaways. But
important to say the thermometer, the temperature at that point's more useful because a lot of times their respiration and heart rate will return to normal, but their temp won't. So that's why it's important to keep checking all of that. So you can't just look at them and go, oh yeah, their breathing's normal, they're fine. So
yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. And one, we haven't talked about sunburn. Do you guys use SPF on any of the horses?
no.
So,
No,
which
because
is
I do feel like their hair, I do know a lot of horses that have white noses can be prone. But we typically, A, we don't really have too many that have big white noses, but B, they usually aren't out in the direct sun for a long time. Um, but I mean, I'm sure they have products for horses with SPF in them. So if you were needing something, some type of coating for them, you can put that on. But then you always worry if you coat their hair, they lose that ability to cool themselves because their coat needs to be able to move to get the air to their skin. So,
yeah, maybe if your horse is getting sunburned, that's something to look into. Less of a proactive necessary step.
exactly.
Okay. Is there anything I've gone through a long list here. I think we've covered a lot of bases for people in terms of helping them manage the heat with their horses. Is there anything that you do to care for horses during the hot months that we haven't touched on yet?
No, I mean, I think we've pretty much, I've gone through what, we keep the routine pretty much the same, just making sure they have water. We fill our water buckets more often in the summer. They get it topped up at lunch to make sure they have 2 full buckets for the day. um, One thing I did want to say, and I don't know how many people think this way, but it is interesting that I come across people sometimes with a horse and they will be very much like its fitness is determined by how much they sweat. So they'll be like, oh, well, that one's not sweating at all. It must be really fit. Whereas the one over there
Oh,
that's so sweaty isn't very fit. And I'm always like, you cannot judge that. So again, I don't think there are many people, but it is surprising how you do come across people that have that belief that the more they sweat, the less fit they are. And you can't, again, it's like people. Sometimes the fittest people sweat more than an unfit person. So you just cannot gauge their fitness by how much they sweat.
yes. What a great reminder. Um, It it really is though, because I mean, you think of a horse crossing the finish line, if they're all foamed up and sweaty, it's that's not the sign of something gone wrong or a lack of preparation. And that's good to know and
No.
keep in mind, especially if it's your horse.
Yeah, exactly. If you have one not sweating, it's more of a concern than one that sweats a lot.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Well, Jen, you knocked it out of the park. We didn't need any long winded responses from Kyle, although, of course, we love whenever Kyle's here, but I really have loved my time just with you, too.
I know it actually was really fun. I will say Kyle wanted me to mention that he's out sweating and mowing and doing all farm stuff. So he said that's a good reminder for all of you out there to not do horses as a career or own a farm, I
Okay,
should
we got Kyle's advice in here. I'll put this at the end. Don't do horses as a
say.
career. Well, say hi to Kyle for us and Riley and
I
Trista
will.
and everyone over there, and stay cool. And thank you again for spending the hour teaching us about this very important topic so that we can make sure that our horses stay comfortable and safe and doing the correct things when the weather's especially hot.
Well, I had a great time because I'm sitting in here in the air conditioning,
Yeah.
and it was great answering all your questions. And I hope that some people got some stuff out of it.
Thank you so much, Jen. And thanks to everyone for tuning in. We'll see you next week.
Thanks a lot, Jessica. Okay, have a good